Welcome back. All right, it's been a little over 3 months since I broached this topic. So, I want to talk about expansion and how things have kind of changed a little bit. Of course, we now know that Alex Morello, he's out. He's out. So, how does that affect things? I think it will affect things. You guys can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'm wearing an Arrows jersey because I'm anticipating a team going to Houston, and I want to just be ready for when that day comes. And I've got a Houston Aeros magnet made up as well. So just saying. Now, the Sens sold for nearly $1 billion, which was seen as a sign that teams are worth a little bit more money right now. Morello got $1 billion for walking away from the NHL. He came out of that with what, $700 million profit? Not too bad. And so for Morello to get that amount of money, there's going to be other owners who say, hey, is the NHL worth it? And if you look at the franchise valuations from Forbes, the values of the NHL franchises add up to more than $40 billion. This is a league where the value is high. Now, what that actually means in day to day and actual money on hand for owners is different. Saying that, well, I have a franchise that's worth $1 billion, it does not mean that tomorrow I could give you $1 billion. It means I have a franchise worth that. If you want to liquidate that, it gets kind of a little bit difficult. But still, you have a league right now where franchise valuations have climbed, meaning that owners do have more money and their assets are worth more. NHL teams are seen as a very attractive league to get into in terms of return, comparatively speaking, with, say, baseball, football, and others, where the franchise valuations are higher, but the cost of buying the team is just ridiculous. So I want to start off looking at what I think we probably get in 2030. I think that'll be the NHL's date, and I have no reason to say that other than just a feeling like, it'll be 9 years after Seattle's gone in. We'll have some semblance of parity between now and then. And I think they go with two teams at a time. And I think we see probably 5 years apart. So my prediction is 2030 we get two teams, and 2035 we get two teams. I think it's pretty clear the next two teams coming in, but the two teams after that, it really could go anywhere. So Houston, the WHA had a team there from 1972 to 1978, and the NHL almost negotiated the rights to bring in the WHA and merge the two leagues in 1977. Once John Ziegler took over, he didn't see any reason to keep them frozen out. Clarence Campbell was not a fan and said, yeah, it's not going to happen. Basically, over my dead body is what he said. And so Ziegler takes over and he's like, well, we'll bring WHA in. Now, it fell through. It doesn't happen in 1977. And as a result, we don't get the Houston Aeros, and we also don't get the Cincinnati Stingers. Cincinnati would have been coming into the NHL as well. So who knows how things might be different if John Ziegler had that go through, right? Now, it is the fourth largest U.S. city. And every time I mention city, people say metro population. So let's go through what the metro population tells me on the internet. Houston, Pasadena, and the Woodlands. Over 7.5 million people. All you have to do is fill a building. That's all you have to do. And out of those 7.5 million people, you just have to attract a certain amount of people to that building. So Toyota Center, which is likely where they'd play, has a hockey capacity at 17,800. So not bad, right? As long as they've got all of the extras, the suites, and all the corporate stuff, and Houston's going to have that. So Houston, the pros are, this is a fresh market for the NHL. Of the four I have on the board, this is the one where the NHL could say, hey, this is brand new. Same thing that they're selling right now in Salt Lake City. And it's nice. It feels different when it's a city that the NHL hasn't been in before. It is great. And it's a large market, so you have that going for you. The owner's willing to spend, and he wants a team as soon as possible. So as long as Tillman's still interested, I would say the NHL probably has an expansion fee of $1 billion or higher, because Bettman won't commit on that, and I would think every passing year the expansion fee goes up. Now, the cons, trying to come up with cons for Houston, honestly, is not easy. I went with unproven NHL support, and again, they've had issues with keeping teams at the AHL level and whatnot. Because I believe this Houston Aeros were at the AHL level briefly. But again, that's completely different than NHL support, right? And the question of, can Texas support two teams? I threw that on the board. I think they can. You guys can let me know your thoughts. Now, Atlanta, and this is where everybody's going to have an opinion. And I'm not going to say that that opinion's wrong. So they had the Flames from 1972 to 1980. The team moves in 1980 because they couldn't draw flies. The Atlanta Flames, the attendance was awful. They had the Thrashers from 1999 to 2011. The attendance wasn't great, but it wasn't moving worthy either. They lost the building in 2011, and Winnipeg had a building, so they moved the team to Winnipeg. There was also ownership with deep pockets in Winnipeg, so it made sense to make that move. So when we look at how large of a city it is, again, according to the population of the city itself, it's 37th. But when you look at Atlanta, Sandy Springs, and Roswell, it's 6.3 million plus in population. And the NHL believes that it is a much better situation now for hockey to succeed there than before. Now, one of the pros is that there are two different ownership groups that want to bring a team here. They want to build a brand new arena, and they feel like they can make it succeed. So while it's going to feel like a rehash, I'm not going to pretend it's not. I do think that having a brand new ownership group and having a city that is familiar with the National Hockey League, I think those can only be benefits. Again, it's not a lack of fan support that caused the team to move in 2011. The market scene is better for the NHL now than it was in 2011. They did have trouble generating positive cash flow. They weren't alone there. There were teams that definitely had trouble with positive cash flow in the late 2000s, but this is a team that did have those struggles. The cons, it is the third attempt. It is. And in the event that this fails, if this falls on its face, it is going to come back on Bettman. So people who are, we want to get Bettman, this might be the gotcha. And this might be one that other NHL owners would look at and go, seriously, Gary, we've expanded twice there under your leadership. And it's failed both times. So in the event that a new Atlanta team came in and still didn't succeed, I think that would definitely cause owners to maybe take a look sideways at Bettman a little bit. And I don't think the NHL wants it to be a 3-time failure. So this is both a positive and a negative for me. So I consider it a con because since the NHL wouldn't want a 3-time failure, would they be looking at Atlanta primarily, or would they be saying, we want to look somewhere else? But honestly, I think the fact they don't want it to be a 3-time failure could mean that they're a little bit better in having set things up. Go look at the list of players that they got in expansion in 1999. Go look at it. It's awful. It was one of the worst expansion teams ever put together. And I think that setting up Atlanta with that kind of roster out of the gate just doomed the franchise to fail with some fans. And it definitely didn't help the ownership group that, they did lose the building. So that's in 2030. And I think Houston's in the West, Atlanta's in the East. And that's another part to consider is you got to have one in the West and one in the East. So if you're like, why not Houston and Kansas City? Because both of them are in the West. Then we get into potentially 2035. Now, if it's me and I get asked this question, okay, Shannon, you can put teams anywhere. Where do you put them? I would put a team in Kansas City. That's your Western team. And I'd put a team in Hamilton. That's your Eastern team. I also think a second team in the Toronto Metro would make bucket loads of money. I think it's ridiculous that they haven't really considered it. Thinking of other American locations where you got teams that are pretty close to one another and they're making money, I don't see any reason not to. But I've got Quebec City and Arizona on the board because those are the ones that it's possible, right? It's possible. Now, Arizona, it's going to be tough because, of course, the Coyotes have just left. So from 96 till 2024, they have the Coyotes. They never had a building. They never had a building where they could make money. So, I also want to mention with Atlanta, currently, and I mean, if they were going to move a team into Atlanta, say tomorrow, they could play out of State Farm Arena, which seats 16,600. Believe that's also the arena where the Atlanta Hawks play basketball, so no guarantee on that. And I mention it because when we get to Phoenix, there's an arena that they'd be sharing with the Suns, and Suns ownership has not been keen on the idea of having a hockey team there. But Phoenix is the 5th largest U.S. city, and the NHL is going to push that a lot, that it's a huge market and they think it can succeed. Phoenix, Mesa, and Chandler, the metro population altogether, over 5 million people. So the population's there. And I know people are going to say, well, they don't support it. I agree. But I also have had reasoning for why fans haven't supported it, which is what an awfully horribly run team the Coyotes have been all the way through. At least on the ice recently, they were run better, but now we'll never get to find out how that storyline would have ended in Arizona. So if they did play at a footprint center, it seats in hockey terms 16,210. And I get these numbers from Wikipedia, where you get the numbers on how many you seat for each sport, right? The pros, it is a big market. It is. It's a big market, and I think a fresh start is needed. So when people ask, would they be the Coyotes? My answer to that, honestly, would be no. No. Morello took that name, took that history. I think in Arizona's best interests, you take that history and you fold it up and you throw it in the bin. Now, you can get Kachina into like a third jersey and you can do whatever and just throw Morello some more money. But I think if you're going to put a team in Arizona, it's got to be a brand new team name. It's got to be something different. I think Thrashers can work. I think Arrows can work. I don't think Coyotes does because of the negative connotation of this team in the desert struggling for almost 3 decades. Now, of course, the con is obvious. They got to get an arena. So Morello's dropped out of the process of trying to find an arena. For the NHL to go back to Arizona, which I still think is the plan, I don't know for sure, but I think it is the plan. They're going to need an owner to have those deep pockets, and then they're going to need to have an arena plan. I don't think the NHL even considers going back to Arizona until you have somebody who says, I've got an arena right here where you can play NHL games and we're going to sell it out. I'm pretty sure. And then you'd have a ticket drive too, I think, before the NHL would 100% approve it. I think you could see like, okay, it's a provisional agreement as long as they sell 3 years worth of season tickets. So they sell out 3 years worth of season tickets, then they're an expansion team. And if not, then maybe you look at Kansas City. Maybe you look at Cincinnati, right? So I do get why people don't want Arizona back, but I think the NHL does want that market. And then you get into Quebec City. Quebec City is a fascinating one. I think there are reasons to go back to Quebec City. I would be fine with going back to Quebec City. I don't know that the NHL wants to. They had the WHA/NHL franchise, the Nordiques, from 1972 through 1995. And it is a part of the fabric of that city. Now, the Bulldogs were there from 1878 until 1920. So, honestly, Quebec Bulldogs is right there. I personally would love it if Quebec came back in and said, you know what, Nordiques, we love the name Nordiques. We're going to be the Bulldogs again. I would be fine with that. Now, the tricky part becomes, I don't know with Quebec's language laws if an English word bulldog would work. And I'm not sure what the French version of bulldog. You guys can let me know the French version of bulldog, but I'm not sure that it would necessarily work for Quebec. Whereas Nordique, that can work, right? So they have the built-in diehard fan base. To me, that is the most important thing. It's not the largest city, largest metro, largest much of anything. Their metro area, again, pulling from Wikipedia for this, 839,311. So again, metro area for Phoenix over 5 million, for Houston over 7.5 million, and for Atlanta over 6.3 million. This is where Quebec fans jump in and say, hey, who cares what the metro center or metro population is when we can fill the building? And they're not wrong. The one thing too to keep an eye on is the Canadian dollar is sitting at 73 cents US currently. It has not been above $1 US since 2011. And when the Canadian dollar goes above $1 US, it's just chaos. I was in retail for a brief period when the Canadian dollar was above the American dollar. You don't want to be standing behind a till and tell Americans that their money's worth less than Canadian money. It doesn't go well. And we don't have any danger of that anytime soon. 73 cents, it's been in and around that range for years now. I don't know that it's going to change. And this means that it's more difficult. So if you're taking over Quebec, that means that you have to pay more money because your money's worth less. And you're in an area where it's a lower amount of people you're drawing from, the metro population smaller, it is a real challenge. For Quebec City to make money is going to be a challenge, even with that built-in fan base that's absolutely incredible. So the Videotron Center, built with the idea of bringing in the NHL, completely too much for junior hockey. 18,259 is your capacity. And the NHL is willing to go there for money, for preseason games, because money, which the Quebec government, there's some debate about whether or not they should have spent the money they did on it. But Videotron Center will be full, I have no doubt in my mind, for preseason games in the National Hockey League. I think they will support the product. I also think for anybody who's thinking about owning a team, remember, if it's $1 billion for your expansion fee, it's about 1.3 billion Canadian. And that's a lot to ask from anybody, right? Especially considering that the expansion fee that Vegas paid when Quebec was looking at it, there was some debate about, whether or not that was a little bit too steep for them. Well, now the expansion fee is going to be way more money, and it makes it more and more difficult for them to make it work. So the pros are you fill the building no matter what the record. In the early 90s, the attendance dropped, sure, but considering how absolutely god-awful that team was, amazing they were able to get the attendance that they did. And the other thing with Quebec, I feel like if you bring in the Quebec Nordiques, you're going to generate a lot of interest in other markets. Now, I know for sure, Canadian markets, the Nordiques are coming to town. We got to see the Nordiques. We got to see the Nordiques, which is likely why the name Bulldogs doesn't work either, because people aren't going to be as excited about Bulldogs as Nordiques. I just got to play devil's advocate a little bit. But I do think that the Quebec Nordiques would generate some interest. And I'm saying Canadian markets, but I think there's some American markets where you'd see it as well. Similar to if the Hartford Whalers returned. And I know Connecticut's governors talked about trying to bring them back. I don't think that's realistic. I think it's a little pie in the sky. But it's probably pie in the sky with the Quebec Nordiques as well. So the low Canadian dollar, the small market, is going to work against Quebec City. It is going to cause the NHL to have some pause when they consider whether or not they're going to go back to Quebec City as a market. But it would also go a long way, I think, to help out with some Canadian fans who feel like there aren't enough Canadian teams. When you look at how many teams there are in the NHL currently, there's 32, and there's 7 Canadian teams? I understand. I get it. You're looking at less than a quarter of the league being Canadian teams, and if you had 4 more American franchises, I understand. I'm not saying that it's wrong to add 4 American franchises if they do it, but I understand why Canadian fans get frustrated. So the dark horses to me, I think Hamilton. I mentioned Hamilton. If I could, I'd put a team in Hamilton. I think you're going to make nothing but money there. I know about the OHL team being moved, and I understand some issues they've had with their arena. But if NHL money was coming to town, I think they'd figure it out. They almost joined the NHL in the early 90s. So when they were looking at the expansion that became Ottawa and Tampa, Hamilton was almost that team instead of Ottawa. Just the expansion fee and just some stuff, and it didn't happen. And then, of course, famously, BlackBerry owner or CEO Jim Balsley, he tried numerous times to get hockey teams into Hamilton. His plan was Hamilton. Just he wanted an NHL team. They make it clear in that miniseries that Jim Balsley's life goal was to own an NHL team, and that was the plan. Now, whether or not that actually is how he really felt, there's probably some hyperbole in that because it's a miniseries. But he did want it. He really did want it, and he pushed. But he pushed too hard, and the NHL didn't want anything to do with him. Saskatoon nearly stole the Blues back in 1983. The NHL stepped in and said, nope, not going to Saskatoon. The Blues got really mad about it and decided not to go to the draft that year. So that was a whole thing that took place. But eventually the Blues get righted. They stay in St. Louis, of course, win the Stanley Cup in 2019, decades after the 83 debacle. But Saskatoon was this close. We were that close to the Saskatoon Blues. I remember the reports on TV and how excited people were. Because remember, in 83, you're only 4 years after Edmonton and Quebec have joined the National Hockey League along with Winnipeg. So that'd be another Canadian team in a league that was only 21 teams at the time. But those are your Canadian options in my eyes. I know people are going to mention Halifax, and I see questions about Regina, various other locations. I think for what the NHL needs, I think the only ones you could make the argument for, Hamilton and Saskatoon. And Saskatoon, I don't know if in the dead of winter in Saskatchewan, I don't know if you'd have trouble attracting players to want to play there or not. That is one thing I've wondered too, is whether or not Saskatoon would work long term. And then you get into the American cities that have shown interest in the National Hockey League, according to Gary Bettman. You got Cincinnati. That's another team in Ohio, right down the street from Columbus. I don't know if that's going to work or not. Kansas City, I think, can work. And they have a building there that is, made for NHL hockey, should they decide to go there. And Omaha. So Nebraska. Why not? Why not Nebraska? Sure. And I think if they came in, it'd have to be Nebraska. I mean, they can't be the Cornhuskers, but something corn related, maybe, or wheat, some kind of fields, something, right? The Nebraska hills, something, right? But at any rate, those are the cities that have shown interest. And the NHL doesn't come out and tell us there's been interest in these cities unless they have some idea that they're going to expand soon. At least I think that. I think Gary Bettman's tone has gone from we're not going to expand to we're not looking at expansion right now. And I think that's been a notable shift over the last couple of years. So I make sure that I'm all set for the day, the time when perhaps the Houston Aeros come into the National Hockey League. Maybe we get the Thrashers back. And then to me, in 2035, I think we get two more cities. And I'm not sold on Arizona or Quebec now as much as I was, say, in April, because the way that things ended in Arizona, kind of ugly. Kind of ugly. And so now Utah gets their clean slate. And maybe it would be exciting if the NHL bucked a trend and said, you know what, we're going to go to 4 markets we've never been in before. Which would rule out Hamilton, because they did have the Hamilton Tigers way back in the day. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. And I wanted to talk about this because I get this question a lot in live streams. Expansion, where and when. So there you go. My guesses as to where and my guesses as to when. But let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you've not done so already. It is a fun topic to broach every few months here and there. Especially when, in this case, what's changed since the last time I did a video on this, Arizona, Morello, gone. The sale to Utah has become a move to Utah, and the Coyotes ownership given up. So that's definitely a huge change, and I think it does allow the NHL to start thinking a little more about expansion. I would expect that over the next year or two, it'll pick up some steam, and we'll know exactly where they're going. But let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe in the event that you've not done so. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.